Many people believe that to get ahead, you have to talk more, show more, impress more. They think success is found in immediate recognition, in sharing every step, every goal, every single idea. But this way of operating weakens them, because when everything is spoken, energy is dispersed, and when you constantly seek validation, you lose your direction. I, Brian Tracy, have learned over a lifetime of trial and error that true transformations happen in silence. Real power is built far from the spotlights, in absolute focus and relentless action. You do not need to announce your moves. You need to execute them with precision, because while others are talking, you are advancing. While others are showcasing, you are building. And while others are getting distracted, you become unstoppable. Silence is not absence. It is a strategy. It is a statement of self-mastery. And the person who masters their silence masters their life. Have you ever wondered what you could truly accomplish if you stopped telling the world what you were about to do and instead simply did it? The first principle I discovered on the silent path was that external noise is the greatest trap for the man or woman who wants to move forward. We live in a culture that rewards the one who speaks the fastest, who shouts the loudest, who posts every single step as if the value of their process depended entirely on the applause of others. Meanwhile, the true builders are in the quiet, working, refining, executing without offering explanations, because they have learned that energy is not to be wasted on demonstrating, but on advancing. They learn that words often dilute power, but silence concentrates it. For years, I was a slave to the need to talk about my ideas. The moment I had a plan, I wanted to share it. The moment I felt a flicker of progress, I sought validation. I believed that by speaking about my goals, I was making them more real. But over time, I understood a difficult truth. I was seeking approval, not commitment. And every time I talk about what I wanted to achieve without having first worked on it in silence, I lost internal strength. I felt exposed, scattered, even guilty for not fulfilling what I had so publicly announced. Because when you speak before you execute, you no longer act out of conviction, you act out of pressure. Silence, in contrast, gave me my power back. I began to be quiet more often, to observe more, to let my actions speak for me. I began to close my mouth and open my eyes, to use the time I previously spent explaining, on doing. And that single shift transformed everything. My days became more focused, my mind clearer, my environment cleaner, because silence also serves as a filter. It pushes away those who are only there out of curiosity and attracts those who value consistency over spectacle. In that silence, I discovered my true rhythm. I stopped looking at what others were doing. I stopped comparing myself. I stopped running to catch up to an image. I became the master of my own process. I stopped feeling obligated to justify my decisions. I learned to enjoy the anonymity, the momentary invisibility, the profound peace that comes from knowing you are building something real, even if no one sees it yet. Because silent growth is the most solid growth. It doesn't need ornaments. It doesn't need approval. It only needs discipline. And the most powerful realization was this: silence forced me to listen to myself. It forced me to stop talking and start understanding why I was doing what I was doing, to ask myself if my actions were truly aligned with my core values, to stop acting on impulse or for the sake of image. I began to move with purpose, because when you stop making noise, you start to hear your intuition. And that voice, though soft, is firm. And when you follow it, you no longer need the noise of the world to feel secure. The strength of silence is not passive, it is strategic. It doesn't mean hiding. It means preparing, focusing, and protecting the process. The man who does not announce his steps walks with a firmer footing. And when that man arrives, he doesn't need to explain anything, because his mere presence confirms that he did not come to convince anyone. He came to fulfill what he set out to do, without shortcuts, without exhibition, only with focus, discipline, and a silence that makes him unstoppable. The second principle I forged on this path was understanding that focus is a superpower that most people disregard. Everyone wants to advance, everyone wants to improve, everyone wants extraordinary results, but very few are willing to close doors, to say no, to choose one single thing and become absolutely lethal at it. The world is full of people with good intentions, with multiple talents, with many ideas, but with no results. They jump from one thing to another. They get distracted by what is shiny. They get lost in what is new. They don't finish what they start. They don't sustain what they choose. And without focus, everything is diluted. I lived like that for a long time. I was always starting something new, always excited by the next big thing. But each new project was a way of avoiding the deep commitment to the previous one, an excuse not to face the discomfort of prolonged execution. This kept me busy, but not productive. I felt tired, but I wasn't advancing. I was caught in a silent trap, doing a lot without getting anywhere. And it was there that I understood that focus is not just a tool, it is a decision of identity. It is a declaration of who you are and what you stand for. I decided then to choose one thing, one goal, one direction, and pour all my energy into it. Not a little bit each day, but everything. No plan B, no distractions, no allowing my mind to sabotage me with new ideas halfway through the process. I became brutally selective with my time, with my habits, with my thoughts, because I understood that the human mind can do incredible things, but it cannot do everything at the same time. The man who wants to embrace everything ends up holding on to nothing. And when focus becomes a habit, it transforms everything, because you stop feeling that anxiety of missing out on something. You stop jumping from stimulus to stimulus, and you start to enter a state of depth where time expands, clarity sharpens, and results multiply. What used to take you days, you now achieve in hours. What used to confuse you, you now solve with a single glance. Because your mind is no longer fragmented. It is aligned. But for that, you have to pay the price. You have to endure boredom. You have to resist novelty. You have to get uncomfortable with the slow, deliberate pace of mastery. Focus is uncomfortable at the beginning. It has no fireworks, no instant dopamine rush. It has repetition. It has commitment. It has silence. And that is why it is so powerful, because almost no one else sustains it. In a world that seeks speed and variety, you choose depth and direction. This choice makes you an anomaly. It makes you dangerous in the best sense of the word. Because when a focused man appears, everything around him adjusts. Everything unnecessary falls away. Everything superficial is exposed. Because his mere presence demonstrates that it is possible, that you can build without hurry, without distraction, without noise. I remember a client I worked with years ago, a brilliant entrepreneur named David. He had a dozen different business ideas, all of them promising. He was running a small consulting firm, developing a software app, writing a book, and trying to launch a podcast, all at once. He was exhausted. His revenue was flat, and he felt like a failure despite working 18-hour days. I told him he had to choose one. Just one. He looked at me as if I'd asked him to cut off an arm. He argued that all of them had potential, that he couldn't let any of them go. I told him, David, right now you have a dozen seeds and you are giving each one a single drop of water a day. None of them will grow. I want you to take all the water and pour it on one seed. I don't even care which one it is. Just choose one and pour everything into it. It was the hardest decision of his life, but he finally chose a consulting firm. He shut down the other projects. For 6 months, he did nothing but focus on acquiring clients and delivering exceptional results for that one business. The first 3 months were agony. He was constantly tempted by his other ideas, but he stayed the course. After a year, his firm's revenue had grown by over 400%. He had become the go-to expert in his niche. The focus didn't just grow his business, it remade him. It taught me, and it taught him, that true greatness is not achieved by trying everything. It is achieved by mastering the essential. And that mastery does not happen in the midst of noise. It only appears when you have the courage to close all doors but one, and turn that door into your gateway to the world you want to build. The third principle that forged my character was to execute without permission, to act without waiting for approval, without asking for validation. Because I discovered that most people do not fail for lack of talent or for lack of ideas. They fail for a lack of sustained action. They have the knowledge, they have the vision, they even have a desire, but they do not act. They hesitate, they doubt, they wait for the perfect moment, they wait to have more clarity, they wait to feel more ready. But that moment never comes, because action is not the result of confidence. It is the cause of it. I also fell into that trap. I would plan, read, educate myself, and share my goals, but I wouldn't act with the intensity that my vision demanded. I would justify myself with elegant phrases. I'm waiting for the right time. I want to have everything perfectly organized before I start. I need to make sure this is the right path. But deep down, I was afraid. I was afraid of failure, afraid of being judged, afraid of moving forward without the support of others. And that fear disguised itself as prudence. But it was cowardice. Until one day, I got tired. I got tired of being a spectator of my own potential. I got tired of seeing others with less preparation achieve more than I did, simply because they acted. I decided to execute without having everything clear, without waiting for the environment to support me, without waiting for others to understand my process. And that is where my real transformation began, because I understood that movement generates clarity. Advancing, even with doubts, is infinitely better than remaining in the paralysis of perfection. I started to act every day, not with violence, but with firmness, not with anxiety, but with a sense of urgency, because I understood that time cannot be recovered, that every day without action was a day I was giving to mediocrity. And when action becomes a habit, it changes everything. It changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way the world perceives you. It changes your external reality because you are no longer imagining. You are building. Execution is not glamorous. It is uncomfortable. It is tiring. It is repetitive. But it is the only way to materialize what you carry inside. Ideas are worthless if they are not translated into action. Potential is useless if it is not converted into results. And dreams do not survive if they are not fed with movement. That's why today, I don't do what I feel like doing. I do what I must do. I learn not to trust my fleeting emotions, but to trust my firm decisions. And if you ask me what the exact moment was when my life began to turn, I would tell you it was when I stopped waiting. It was when I stopped asking for permission, when I stopped looking for guarantees, and simply started to execute, with fear, with doubts, with imperfection, but with decision, because the power is in the one who does, in the one who builds in silence, in the one who, without saying anything, shows up one day with the result in hand. And that man needs no explanations, because the one who executes does not compete. He simply arrives. This brings me to the fourth principle that changed me from the inside out, understanding that I do not need to share my progress for it to be real. We live trapped in a culture of constant exposure, where every small step seems to need witnesses, reactions, and applause. But that doesn't build results. It only feeds the ego. And a satisfied ego is the enemy of silent progress. Because when you share too soon, you can get trapped in the image of someone who is advancing, instead of actually continuing to advance. For years, I myself fell into that cycle. I would post a photo from the gym before my body had changed. I would publish a goal as soon as I wrote it down. I would announce a project that I hadn't even started. And the worst part was that upon receiving attention, I already felt satisfied, as if by simply showing my intention, I had already fulfilled my duty. But I hadn't accomplished anything. I was deceiving myself, because external validation can become a drug that prevents you from seeing what you have not yet built. Applause does not mean progress. A reaction does not mean a result. Only constant, silent action takes you to the place where you truly belong. So I started to guard my progress, to protect my plans, to build as if no one was watching. I understood that what is private becomes stronger. When something is in its most vulnerable stage, what it needs is not exposure. It needs care. It needs focus. It needs silence. This is not out of fear, but out of strategy. It's not out of insecurity, but out of wisdom. Because when you talk less, you listen more. When you show less, you perfect more. And when you move away from the noise, you get closer to the truth. And it wasn't easy. Sometimes I felt the temptation to share, to prove that I was doing something, to demonstrate that I was growing. But I resisted. And in that act of resistance, my character became firmer. I learned to sustain my process in solitude, to not look for witnesses, to be enough for myself. And in that internal space, I found a new kind of confidence, not the kind that comes from being seen, but the kind that is born from knowing you are committed. That is a confidence that does not break. It's a confidence that doesn't depend on looks, that doesn't need filters, that doesn't fade when no one is applauding. If you are here listening to this, it's because deep down you know that your best version does not need to be announced. It needs to be built. Day by day, step by step, without distractions, without interruptions, without the urgency to show off. Because what you are building is bigger than any post. It is your identity, your vision, your entire life. And that does not need publicity. It needs silence, presence, and daily execution. Subscribe to this channel if this is speaking to you. This channel is for those who choose to build without noise, those who advance with intention, those who do not need to be seen to feel valuable. And leave me one thing in the comments. What is that one goal you are building in silence that no one knows about yet? Write it down. Reaffirm it for yourself. This space is yours. Because when you write it with decision, you have already begun to turn it into reality. The fifth principle I integrated with force into my life was the art of listening with intention. I don't mean listening to respond, to debate, or to correct. I mean listening to understand, listening to absorb, listening to grow. Because in a world where everyone wants to talk, the one who knows how to listen becomes invincible. Most people do not listen. They wait for their turn to speak. They interrupt. They get ahead of themselves. They impose their vision. They believe their opinion is more valuable than someone else's experience. And that's why they don't learn. That's why they don't evolve. Because he who does not listen repeats his mistakes, and he who repeats stagnates. I was like that for a long time. I believed I already knew. I thought I didn't need advice, that I was right. And in that pride disguised as security, I was closing doors. I was distancing myself from learning, from opportunities, from real connections, until I stopped and decided to change my attitude. I decided to be quiet more often, to open myself up more, to truly listen, not just to more successful people, but to anyone who had a story, a wound, a different perspective. I understood that every human being carries a lesson, and that whoever has their ears closed is missing the map that could save them years of mistakes. Listening with intention taught me to see beyond the words. It taught me to recognize the pain behind criticism, the fear behind pride, the wisdom behind a simple story. It taught me to stop imposing my ideas and start nourishing them with different points of view. I realized that what I needed most was not to have the last word, but to ask the right question. Because personal transformation does not begin with a declaration. It begins with an honest question. And that question often arises from listening to what you have been avoiding. Silence also became my ally in conversations. I no longer feel the need to fill every space. I no longer seek to prove anything. I let the other person express themselves, to empty themselves, to reveal what they normally would not say. Because when you don't interrupt, when you listen without judging, the other person lowers their defenses. And in that moment, the connection becomes real. And what you discover in that shared silence can change you more than 1,000 pieces of advice. But this habit also has an internal dimension. Learning to listen to myself, to read my emotions, to question my reactions, to understand where my thoughts are coming from. Because many times, we talk to silence what we feel. And when we are quiet, those emotions come to the surface, not to destroy us, but to be seen. And in that internal observation, you begin to know yourself, to see yourself with more compassion, to correct yourself with more precision. Today, I listen more than I speak. I listen to grow. I listen to serve. I listen so as not to forget that I do not know everything, that there's always something more to learn, to improve, to discover. Because a man who listens, adapts, refines himself, becomes wise. He does not need to shout to impose his will. His mere presence transmits clarity. And when he does speak, he doesn't do it from a need to be heard, but from the certainty of having understood. This habit taught me that you don't need to speak loudly to be respected. You need to listen deeply to be transformed. And if you practice this, if you quiet yourself a little more, if you observe, if you create space, you will see how the world begins to teach you everything you need to know. It just takes silence, humility, and a decision to learn without needing to dominate. Because sometimes the greatest power lies in saying nothing and absorbing everything. The sixth principle I rooted as a habit was to protect my decisions from the opinions of others. There is nothing that dilutes a man's clarity faster than constantly exposing himself to the voices of those who are not living his process. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a suggestion. Everyone projects their own fears and their own limits as if they were absolute truths. And if you are not strong, if you are not defined from within, you end up adapting your path to please expectations that you do not even share. You end up changing direction, Not because something is wrong, but because someone else doesn't understand it. For a long time, I was vulnerable to this. I would start with enthusiasm, with vision, with focus, and as soon as someone questioned my decision, I would begin to doubt. I would ask myself if it made sense, if I was exaggerating, if I should change my route. Not because there were real reasons, but because I couldn't stand the judgment, the ridicule, the skeptical look. I wanted to advance without being criticized, without being misinterpreted, without bothering anyone. But I discovered that this is impossible. Every firm decision, every unique path, makes people uncomfortable. It annoys the one who does not dare. It irritates the one who abandoned their own process. It awakens discomfort in the one who lives by justifying their own mediocrity. It was then that I made a radical decision. My decisions would no longer be democratic. They would no longer be submitted to a vote, or to public discussion, or to unnecessary debate. I learned to be quieter and to decide with more firmness, to hold my course even when others did not understand it. Because purpose is not explained, it is sustained. And whoever is truly committed to their vision stops wasting energy trying to convince others. They simply act, and the results, over time, become the only explanation necessary. This habit taught me to value my own judgment, to trust my intuition, my experience, and my preparation, not from arrogance, but from responsibility. It is my life, my consequences, my path, and I cannot allow those who will not carry my results to decide for me. Today, I only listen to advice from those who are where I want to be, only from those who have walked the path with pain, with discipline, with coherence. I do not listen to opinion from those who only observe, criticize, or speak from a place of fear. I also learned to keep silent about important decisions, not to announce changes until I have executed them, not to talk about plans until I have materialized them. I understood that the more exposed a decision is, the more vulnerable it is to dilution. Every opinion, every seed of doubt, can halt your momentum if you are not completely firm. And that firmness is built in silence, in intimacy, in the internal conversation where there's no external noise contaminating the path. Today, every time I make an important decision, I ask myself this question: am I choosing this because I feel it is right, or because someone else expects it of me? And if the answer is not mine, I discard it. I no longer live to please or to calm expectations. I live to build a life of coherence. And that inevitably bothers some people. But it also liberates you. Because when you stop asking for permission to be yourself, everything else falls into place. Whoever should stay, stays. Whoever shouldn't, leaves. And what remains is a life built with intention, with courage, and with absolute silence in the face of the voices that no longer have power over you. The seventh principle I installed as an unbreakable habit was to eliminate excessive explanation. One of the biggest energy drains in the life of a person committed to their growth is a constant impulse to justify every step, every decision, every change. Explaining why you didn't go out, why you changed direction, why you pulled away, why you are no longer available. But the truth is this: you do not owe an explanation to someone who is not walking with you. You do not need permission to protect your energy. You do not need to justify your transformation. For years, I fell into the trap of over-explaining. I felt guilty saying no, afraid of being misinterpreted, insecure about standing firm. So I talked too much. I tried to make people understand. I went out of my way to convince them, to show that my intentions were good. But in the end, none of it worked. The person who wants to understand doesn't need many words, and the person who doesn't want to understand will never be convinced, even if you explain it 1,000 times. And in that process, I was wearing myself out. I was losing strength, weakening myself with every unnecessary explanation. I learned that internal clarity does not need to be defended. When you are truly aligned with your truth, you can remain silent without feeling like you are hiding. You can withdraw without giving speeches. You can act without narrating. Because a mature individual does not seek approval, they seek congruence. They don't need spectators to feel firm. They have already chosen themselves, defined themselves, and from that place, they act with power, with sobriety, with silent authority. Eliminating excessive explanation also helped me clean up my environment. Those who truly respected my process never demanded explanations. They simply observed and accompanied me. The others moved away, criticized, became uncomfortable. But that wasn't a problem. It was a natural purification. Because the person who needs to control your path doesn't love you, they condition you. And the person who truly respects you doesn't need to understand every decision. They just need to see you at peace. This habit taught me to trust my inner word more than external reactions, to let my actions speak, to let time be my ally. The man who executes with discipline has no time to debate with those who are unwilling to build. And when someone demands unnecessary explanation from me, I simply respond with presence, not with arguments. I have nothing to prove. Over time, this becomes a force that is intimidating. In a world addicted to justification, the one who is quiet and moves forward shines with an intensity that no one can extinguish. I now move with a simple rule. If I have to explain it too much, it's not the right place, it's not the right person, it's not the right time. I do not spend energy on convincing. I do not try to change perceptions. I just follow my path. And on that path, silence protects me, focus directs me, and constant execution validates me. The man who knows who he is does not argue to prove it. He simply proves it with every step, without noise, without permission, without explanations. The eighth principle that became a cornerstone in my life was to value temporary invisibility. In this world that glorifies exposure, instant fame, and constant recognition, there's a stage that almost no one can endure. It's the stage where you are growing in the shadows, when no one is applauding you, when no one is asking how you're doing, where the results are not yet visible. It is that stage where you are sowing with all your might, but the world has not yet taken notice. And if you don't have mental strength, you quit. Not because you're not advancing, but because there's no echo, there are no witnesses, there's no validation. I lived through that stage many times. I would write, I would wake, I would discipline myself, and I would feel that everything was invisible, that no one recognized it, that no one valued it. And a part of me wanted to show off, wanted to shout, "Look at me, I'm changing." But I learned something that gave me the peace I needed. A tree does not ask the forest for permission to grow. It simply digs its roots into the earth. In silence, it strengthens its foundation, it nourishes itself, and when the time is right, it blossoms without having told anyone it was going to. Accepting that temporary invisibility made me invincible. I stopped waiting for recognition. I stopped seeking gazes. I stopped depending on applause. And I began to enjoy the process, to see each day as an invisible but cumulative investment. Silent progress has a unique beauty. No one sees it coming. And when it arrives with a force that is impossible to ignore. It is no longer necessary to announce yourself. The impact speaks for itself. What was built in silence is sustained with strength. During that stage, I learned to trust the rhythms of life, not to despair over immediate results, to understand that every great project needs incubation, time, repetition, dirty work that is not shown, discipline that no one sees. And the more you tolerate this invisibility, the greater your capacity will be to sustain what comes next. Because the one who does not know how to grow in the shade cannot withstand the light. They break under pressure, they crumble under tension. Because they have no roots, they only have haste. And here is something you must understand with absolute clarity. You are not failing because no one sees you. You are building. You are not stagnant because no one recognizes you. You are developing. You do not need likes, or views, or approval. You need to endure, to repeat, to continue, even if it hurts, even if it's not noticeable. Because what is being formed inside of you in this silence is unbreakable. Today, I bless every stage in which no one applauded me, because that is where I became strong. That is where I forged character. That is where I learned to be enough for myself. When you learn to be with yourself without noise, without witnesses, without prizes, that is when you truly know yourself, respect yourself, and make yourself unstoppable, not for what you achieve, but for the person you are becoming. Invisible today, but impossible to ignore tomorrow. And it all started by saying nothing, by resisting, by continuing in silence. And that is worth more than 1,000 ovations. The ninth principle that transformed my way of living and deciding was learning to contain myself. To not react on impulse, to not respond immediately, to not make decisions in the midst of anger, frustration, or pride. I discovered that in the pause lies power. The man who knows how to contain himself, who does not respond by reflex, who breathes before acting, always has the advantage, not because he is slower, but because he is wiser. He is not being dragged along by his emotions. He is being guided by his conscience. For a long time, I reacted to everything. If someone attacked me, I responded. If something frustrated me, I exploded. If something hurt me, I showed it. I lived exposed, without a shield, without a filter. And that weakened me. It made me predictable. It made me manipulable. The person who cannot master their response hands over control to everything around them. And that silent loss of control pulls them away from their center, from their peace, from their power. Until I understood that not everything deserves a response. Not everything that bothers you needs your attention. Often, the greatest act of strength is to remain silent. I began to practice the pause, to observe without reacting, to let the emotion pass before I spoke, before I decided, before I wrote that email, before I closed a door or built a wall. I discovered that what seemed urgent was almost never so. What seemed grave often dissolved with time. What seemed like an offense was often just a reflection of someone else's pain. I learned not to take everything personally, to choose my battles, to offer silence where I used to offer shouts, to offer distance where I used to offer conflict. This habit gave me something that no external achievement had ever given me, internal dominion. I no longer moved from the emotion of the moment, but from the purpose of the long term. I was no longer a slave to what I felt. I was a master of how I acted, and that earned me a type of respect that is not requested. It is commanded. People may not understand your silence, but they feel it. They may not share your measured reaction, but they respect it because it transmits authority. An authority that needs no volume, no aggression, no explanations, only coherence. To contain yourself is not to repress. It is to choose. It is to decide when to speak and when not to, when to act and when to observe, when to advance and when to wait. It is using time as an ally, the mind as a filter, the heart as a guide. It is knowing that you are not losing by not reacting. You are winning by not betraying yourself. Because every time you react from impulse, you are giving away something of yours, your focus, your energy, your time. And I am no longer willing to give any of that away to those who do not deserve it. Today, I practice containment as an art, as a form of internal leadership. The one who can remain silent when everyone is shouting, think when everyone is reacting, and stand firm when everyone is falling. That man does not need to impose himself. His very calm is unsettling because it shows that he is not at the mercy of his environment. And that silent but evident freedom is what makes him different. It is what makes him powerful. In a world of impulses, the one who masters their response masters their destiny. The 10th and most powerful principle that transformed me completely was this: the true power lies in building a life that does not need to be defended. A life so solid, so coherent, so profound that it requires no justifications, no explanations, no exhibitions. A life that makes no noise but leaves a mark, that does not seek attention but has an impact in silence, that does not depend on applause because it is built on purpose, discipline, and inner truth. To get there, I had to learn to be quiet, to focus, to execute without asking for permission, to sustain myself when no one was watching, to walk when everyone was talking, to resist when no one believed. This is not a philosophy for pleasing others. It is a way of living to transcend. And on that path, I discovered that the strongest man is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who can look at everyone in silence and still move forward. The one who can endure the discomfort of not being understood. The one who becomes his own source of direction. Because when you choose to live without unnecessary exposure, when you decide to build with depth instead of speed, when you stop competing with the noise, what emerges is your most powerful version. Your version that no longer needs to prove anything, only to do, only to be. And yes, many will call you cold, distant, selfish. They won't understand your focus. They don't know how to live without sharing every step. They cannot stand the silence that forces them to look within. But that is not your problem. Your only responsibility is to your vision, to your soul, to that inner voice that does not shout but never lies. And when you obey it, when you align with it and make your life a silent testimony, everything changes. Because then you don't need others to believe in you. You have already believed. You have already chosen. You have already acted. And that is all that matters. My life began to turn when I stopped asking for permission, when I started building without announcing, when I turned my process into a personal pact, not a public spectacle. And in that silence, I found strength, I found peace, I found direction. Because silence teaches you to stop looking outside. It forces you to look inside, to organize what no one sees, to work on what no one applauds. And that is a work that sustains everything, because what is built in silence is not destroyed by words. So, if you take anything away from all of this today, let it be this: you do not need to talk more, you need to act better. You do not need to be seen, you need to be coherent. You do not need to prove anything, you need to fulfill your promise to yourself. And for that, you do not need to shout. You need presence. You need focus. You need a decision to make your life a masterpiece that speaks for you, even if you never say another word. If these ideas have resonated with you, if you feel that call to a quieter, more powerful way of living, then subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. This is a community for builders, for doers, for those who understand profound strength that lies in quiet, focused action. Because in the end, those who truly change the world are not the ones who make the most noise. They are the ones who, through silence, focus, and relentless execution, simply refuse to stop.